Well, as you know, Kyle, I've always been a big fan of Aston Martin, as you can tell by the shirt. Never once wrote them off this season. Always expected them to come back. Don't watch our previous videos; they don't matter. You know what? Similarly, always thought Mercedes was a bit washed, a bit overrated. What the fuck is this season, man? What I don't know. Every time a new race comes along, it questions everything we know about every team and every driver and where they stack up.
You
I
know what
don't
it
know.
is? Outside, again, of Red Bull, because I think they have just nailed it so hard that it's hard even for them to get it wrong. Biggest thing that we said to him, if you look at our season preview, was that this year it would really matter for teams to get it right, and they would fall when they don't get it right. And this weekend was a perfect showing of that, with some drivers and teams getting it right and jumping massively, others getting it just slightly wrong, and completely falling from the second best team to the fifth, sixth, seventh, you could argue. And it can just happen randomly.
They were slower than Alpine. Like, they got overtaken by Alpine pretty easily. So, yeah, it was a weird weekend. I feel like I've said that a lot as well. It was just so odd. Like, I know...
It was good weird. It wasn't like weird like, ugh. It was like a real challenging weird for the drivers, for us watching, trying to figure it out, going... This isn't working out at all. And then you go, okay, now he's going to be quick. Oh, he's been overtaken 4 times. What?
Yep. So, I mean, I do want to start at Aston because obviously I've worn the shirt. Big fan, big fan. Always have been, as I said.
Yes.
They went back to, they've obviously all had their struggles the second part of this year. And as it turns out, it pretty much was entirely due to their upgrades, because this weekend they're like, we're going back to a baseline. We're going back to the last time we had a car that was good, which I guess was Canada. I guess Canada was probably the last time they actually had a competitive car. They're like, we're going to go back to basics. We don't want any of these upgrades on the car. And they're just like, oh, they're fast again. It's like, if they're this fast with a car that was only upgraded to Canada, imagine if their upgrades worked.
Yes.
That would have been insane. But I guess it shows that I don't know if other teams are like this, but I guess it just shows how finicky those updates can be. Like, you can get it so right, like McLaren, who just jumped from the back to the front in the space of 2 races, or you can get it so wrong, like Aston. Like, it's so marginal, it feels like, with these cars. But it's good to see that at least their Aston's baseline is still fast in the grand scheme of things, I think. And they've obviously still got to understand why.
That's the biggest thing, is they have to understand why, right? You can just sometimes set something and get lucky. That's useless unless you understand why moving forward. Because then you go, well, let's hope we get lucky again. It's like, no. You need to know why this happened. To move forward, not just for the short term, but more importantly for next year as well.
Well, I have to understand why updates aren't working. Like, things that are, if things aren't working in the correlations with like wind tunnel shit, and then they're bringing it to the racetrack, like, oh, this isn't at all how we saw in their.
Or even if they do work, why weren't these updates better? You may have an update you bring that internally you go, this looks pretty good, but then someone else brings one 5 times more effective. You go, how did we even miss it? Even looking from that angle, right? It's,
but obviously they got in the feature race, they got P3, P5. I think it has to be probably one of their strongest races since again, I think Canada, where Alonso got P2, I believe.
Yes, I think as a team as a whole,
it's probably even earlier than that.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm thinking even as a team as a whole, as in both drivers, everyone, all the sessions, it's probably their best all year. I think elevated by the fact that Stroll didn't seem to have that much of a gap at all, which was kind of the first time in recent memory I think we can recall that.
Outside of that sprint shootout where he somehow went from qualifying P3 the night before and then qualified P17 the day after. That was strange, but outside of that, he actually looked pretty good, like, compared to Alonso. And this isn't like one of those like, oh, Alonso's kind of fading and he's making mistakes. It's like, no, this was an Alonso who was on his game and he was still kind of matching his pace. So
exactly, he wasn't that far off, really. Overall, right? You'd say again, if this was his standard, you'd almost have no hesitation in saying these two. Although you've got Alonso who's really tipping the top of the iceberg. as long as Stroll's a supported character strong enough for him, that's probably what they want here. And this weekend, he kind of saw that for probably, as I say, the first time all year.
He's probably just saved his seat for next year with this. Like, I feel like there's a few drivers
if he keeps it up.
Yeah,
that's that. Yeah.
I feel like there's a couple of drivers that have saved their seats for next year. I think with their performances this weekend, and Perez would be the other one. We'll get onto that, but I think the way we both sort of done our notes, we've sort of done them chronologically by session. So I think there's enough to talk about in each session that we're just going to go through all the sessions and sort of pick apart a couple of notes. But we'll start with the quali. It is
Friday.
The first quali, yes, the Friday, the qualifying for the main race. I hate sprint weekends. I just too much to talk about. It's worth noting before this is that the qualifying did start 15 minutes late, and that is pertinent, obviously with what happened right at the end as well. But I mean, the first note I wanted to mention is I think it was the shortest time difference between P1 and P16. It was like under half a second to the cutout time. It's
incredible.
Yeah. I think in the whole time of this qualifying format, it's since 2006. I think
since they put this format in, they said that distance between 1 and 16
it's unbelievable.
Was the smallest they've ever seen. And sure, it's a shorter track, but it's like you think back to going, oh well, if you're a second or a second and a half off the leader, then you're probably going to sneak in. You saw some guys out there where they were setting times and you went, oh, he's only 0.4 off max. That must be pretty good. P14. You're like, huh? Like it's, you know, I think see those, you see those shots where they zoom out and show how far apart people are. And it almost looks like everyone's so just jammed together because the reality is that's how it's like.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I was going to say, because I remember seeing early on, because I think in free practice 1, it looked like the AlphaTauris were quite strong, and they were later on in the weekend. But here, I think it was Ricciardo who was one of the first across the line in those final runs.
Yes.
And he was like P2 or P3, and you're like, oh my God, that's a great time. And then he got knocked out, and it's like, what the fuck happened? Like, it was just that close.
And it wasn't just because they were slow, it just really was right place, right time, and getting a smashing lap here, which this track's normally pretty good for quali, because it is quite tricky, and also I guess you also set your car up here for quali very different to the race as well. So that can sometimes mix things up. You can get different drivers in, different performance in one session compared to the next, which I guess was also a trend here we saw as well. But it wasn't just the fact that it was a close quali, it's also that we had Doomsday approaching towards the end of the quali.
So odd.
Yeah, so we kind of had we saw the clouds coming and they were saying we're barely going to make it in, and that made, the later sessions even trickier, because I think it wasn't just a timing of get out there and go, last where the track was rubbing in. Yeah. Because as we saw with Piastri, that was actually too late, because then the wind picked up and it literally threw you off the track. It was too late to even set your lap. So we got that bit of a kind of jumbled start, and it was a bit like, what is this going to throw at us? So I think, what was it? We had Max that qualified on pole, because he's just sorted out.
He also went out first, like he was waiting at the end of the pit lane. I don't know if they had like other information, but Perez came out like one of the last drivers, so maybe they didn't. Maybe it was just Max's side of the garage. They're just like, hey, we don't want to risk it, just get out first, get your lap done. But because he had his lap done first, he's the only one that got,
he avoided the worst of that temperamental weather.
I think he was the only one that got a semi-representative time, but even then he was like, from Q2 to Q3, I think they said he was like 0.7 down on his time. And I don't know if that was because, like, I know Leclerc came over the radio and said this was the weirdest thing. It's like, it felt like it was raining, but there was no rain. Like, I don't know if it was just because the track temperature dropped so suddenly.
It must have been because it was plummeting and a little bit of wayward wind at that point. The combination of both. Like the tires wouldn't have been heated for that temperature at all. And then, that slippiness factor, they would have felt that. Yeah.
So, Max getting out literally right away probably was one of the only drivers to get semi-representative times. Everyone behind him was like, oh, they're way off the pace. I think Piastri was the only one that had like a decent sort of first and second sector, but obviously, as you saw, third sector.
Yes, he obviously was actually pushing, and it was a shame that he was the one that didn't get through there. But Yeah, so we had that mixed grid. It was Max Leclerc from Stroll, and I think it was then Alonso P4, if I recall correctly.
It was,
two
yeah.
Astons back to back.
Yep. That's correct.
And then we'll talk about it in this session, because then we went, of course, into Saturday, which is the sprint day. And we had the sprint quali, and all the conversation was about how the prior day, based off the conversation from Mexico and other sessions with the qualifying and the queuing, that implemented something new here. So because they had a fairly long pit exit that was fairly wide, they said, hey, by the way, if you want to queue up, you have to do it on the left. If you want to go through, you let cars through on the right. They said, we've got the space here. We're going to try it. And all the drivers went, okay, we'll try it. And this was part of what, we saw Max come out in that prior session where he just wanted to get by some cars. And there were some cars that didn't really leave him with full room. He had to get a bit of a grass. And the FA was pretty quick to go, that's the correct thing to do that Max is doing.
Yeah.
Everyone else needs to move over. And some cars are really good at it. And others forgot it was a rule, got in the way. And the FA immediately went, reminder, can't do that. 2-place, 3-place penalty. See ya. And they're like, oh, so for Saturday, everyone's like, engineers would have been like, stay on the fucking left side. You're going to go slow. Please. Like, they're actually serious about this. They've found a rule. They're going to stick to it.
Yep. Understandable. Yeah. I think it was Russell and then both Alpines that picked it up. Yeah. It's funny because the Russell's been like the biggest advocate for finding a rule to try and stop all this stuff.
Yeah.
And he's consistently the worst at like, he's always under investigation for this stuff, but he's also the biggest advocate for it. I don't understand.
He's always the one that someone gets in his way. He's like, oh, this is crap. And then he immediately does it to someone else.
It's so odd. It doesn't make sense that he would be such a big advocate for it and then just immediately decide, I'm going to do this and then impede and then get 2-place grid penalty. But, it is what it is. I think that probably the biggest thing in the sprint shootout was the Ocon-Alonso collision. Like, that's the big story where Ocon blames Alonso for having a spin on for having a moment on the curb. And apparently that's Alonso's fault. I thought that was funny.
Yes.
Yeah, but that red flag obviously took Ocon out. I don't know. Is there much conversation going? Is there still beef happening with that? I haven't read much on that.
But... No, I think it was just a clash between two. I think I made a note. I think I mucked my notes up here because that's what I do.
Nah.
I think just a quick note. I thought it was the sprint quali. This was the case. I think for the main quali, when I looked at the results, it was like the first time maybe this year that the top 5 teams locked out the final qualifying. Like there was the 2 Red Bulls, Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes, Aston. It was basically the 10 of them in that final session. And I hadn't recalled seeing that in a session before because I was looking going, oh, who was out of sorts? I went, actually, none of those contenders that you go, oh, they just missed out, from those teams that you might think. Maybe Aston is more common, but an Aston on their game, I guess you would have been surprised to see them drop out, right? So in this case, I actually noticed that the top 10 were on locked it out just for that one session though. That was for the main race qualifying. But the
cool.
The sprint quality started off with a bizarre incident where you talked about a bit of the beef. It mainly sprung because Alonso, I think he kind of put his hands up to say, well, because he was on the outside for those that I guess didn't see it or didn't really look at it, but he was kind of on the outside of T2. He could have given a bit more room, but he still gave enough room on the inside. Ocon going through, as much as he say he didn't have to correct an oversteer or leave it, you want to be tight to that curve, and he moved away from the curb. He didn't do that just to try and get close to Alonso. Obviously, something went wrong there. So I think Alonso was a bit saying, look, I could have given more room. That's fair enough. But he also gave enough under normal circumstances. But Ocon was all, oh, well, I didn't have to correct anything. And he shouldn't have been there. And it was like...
Yeah, did you take that into consideration, that he didn't have to correct anything? It's like, yeah, but I saw the footage, bro. Like, I have eyes.
Yeah.
I saw that you had a moment. And that's if you did.
Yes, there was some reason you moved wide and it wasn't someone else pushing you. And you don't... That's not the line you take. If that was the line you normally take and Alonso was in the way, of course, that's really bad. But that's not what happened. I think Alonso was kind of stoic, just being like, I mean, I was just there and it was unfortunate, but I did think I'm in the wrong. And everyone went, yeah, you right.
Yeah.
So, yes, it meant we had quite a delayed session because even though Ocon's hit wasn't, it was moderately big, but it was enough to the barrier where they had to delay it a little bit. But You mentioned, I guess, yeah, with AlphaTauri on the Saturday, Friday having quite bad pace, but on the Saturday actually kind of got their Shazam together and seemed to find something.
Yeah.
Hoping it will be the first weekend where we get a true head-to-head with both AlphaTauris. Surely there'll be nothing in the race that means we can't have a proper fight like we had at Japan between Lawson and Yuki. We were going to have it here, but we'll save that later anyway.
Yep.
Yes. What was the top 3 you ended out with from that? I didn't note it down in my notes.
Norris got a P1, Max got P2.
Because it was Max on front.
Perez, I think, got P3.
That was correct. Yes.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, because I remember I had a note here that Checo actually got, like, he actually had a really good lap, because I believe he was only, like a tenth behind Max on used tires. He only had a set of used tires, whereas Max had a set of new tires.
He was up by like 2.5 tenths into sector 2. I remember I was watching and I had hope.
That's right. Yeah.
I was visibly just like, come on, because it was just like that sector 3, which he'd actually been pretty strong in all weekend. Was that sector 3 and that run up the hill. So he was like 2.5 tenths up. And I was thinking, oh my God, he's going to do it. Yeah. And then he still got a good time, but it was like, it still should have been better. Like, what?
He lost like 2.5 tenths or something. Yeah.
He had the used tires. So even for a used lap, it was pretty good. Overall theme of the weekend here was actually rationing tires was a massive deal. A lot of teams like AlphaTauri actually saved a lot of soft sets, not using them in other sessions when they could have used them like qualifying to gain an advantage.
Was it AlphaTauri or Alfa Romeo? I remember Alfa Romeo.
I think both of them did, because I remember both of them getting unlucky, as we'll say, which meant they didn't get to pay off that advantage later on. But there were some teams that maybe sacrificed a little bit of pace or laps here and there on soft and medium tires to account for the race. And I thought that was kind of interesting. It didn't seem everyone was saying, oh, we've got no tires and we're just all wandering around. It almost seemed to be like that perfect balance where you can maybe take a fresh set and try get 1 or 2 more places for quality, but you might not have a fresh set for the sprint or a fresh set for your second, third stint in the race. I guess we didn't know what the pit strategy was going to be. We thought it might be a 1-stop, but it turned out to be a pretty clear 2-stop, and therefore that kind of thing with tire wear on softs and mediums matters a lot. So I felt that was a good balance this weekend between, teams actually having to think of all the sessions going, we've really got to think about our tires properly here. So that was a good, little story to follow as well.
Yeah, I do think having like the hard tires playing literally 0 part because they were just like completely useless is something that I still think it's true. I still think they need to fix. Like it just happens on too many weekends where it's like, okay, 2 compounds of the tires are like decent. Honestly, here for the race, apparently 1 compound of tire, only the soft tire for the feature race was actually the good tire. Apparently the mediums weren't even that good.
Yeah.
But the hard tire was like completely useless. Like
it's the hard tire only comes in when there's a 1-stop race. Because if the hard tire is so bad, that's when they go, we're not even going to use it. We're going to 2.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's, and I know like this is a future talk, but I know Pirelli are sort of, they're trying to discuss things about how they're changing the construction of the tire to try and get the best of both worlds. They've been running a lot of
tests as well recently, so obviously they're trying to do something.
Yeah, but I mean, we'll see what happens with that. But I believe, we talked about how it was like P1 to P16 and that first quali was like separated by less than half a second. I believe they also said P1 to P20 in the SQ1. It was like just over 8 tenths of a second, and I believe that was the closest margin in like qualifying history as well. So
crazy.
Yeah, like it was like 0.810 seconds or something, which is fucking insane. That's all drivers, crazy. Every single driver.
Yep.
And like granted, it was we had the red flag at the end of SQ1, so it might have changed a little bit, but
we've had that plenty of times before. That's not new. This is we've had that plenty of times before.
That's true.
It's crazy.
But we did see, I think Norris said he got pole and he was like, I don't understand, that was such a bad lap.
Yes,
I don't think anyone had a good lap. It was weird.
That was the thing. It was still tricky out there. Yeah,
no one was really happy.
Yeah.
It's very odd. But I guess leading into the sprint, it didn't seem to matter because Max just immediately took the lead into turn 1, and that was all she wrote.
Had a start.
Yeah.
Pretty important that they sorted out that start. I think what I said for this sprint was it was a pretty good teaser for the race in a way.
Yeah.
I think almost everyone started on soft tires except for a few that started on medium. They seem to just fall to 19th and 20th. I think it was like the 2 Haas cars at the end. So kudos on them for trying. I did watch them, but it just didn't seem to do anything, which is a shame. I think most were actually on used softs, which was interesting. So maybe both showing that they thought the wear wouldn't be that bad in the sprint, and they wanted to save some of that new rubber for, again, the main race that was the following day. But it was a good teaser. We had, aside from Max getting that good start, we had good fighting in the middle. Perez had a bad start, but he did get his teeth out to climb back, so that was still good to see. Where, look, if he's going to make these mistakes, which he shouldn't be making anyway, this weekend he actually said, damn it, I'm just, going to at least fight back and do the minimum that he should be doing from that perspective. So to say, it was a good teaser. I mean, Max is up in front. He didn't necessarily romp away, but he's still, once he got it at the start, unless someone's going to get him on those first few laps of DRS, which is kind of what nearly happened in the race, which we'll get into. He kind of, could control it, which, was... What do you expect? I was hoping at one point, with my my prediction such, if I recall correctly, I remember seeing that Russell at some point looked really on it. And I thought he was like a P2 at one point.
He was,
and I thought, oh my god, he has to catch it past Max because otherwise I'm done for, and you're going to streak ahead. And then he hit a wall, and then Norris and others got past him. I was like,
and we saw the very beginnings of the Mercedes downfall for this weekend. Yes. So, because, I mean, the couple of notes I did have from the sprint, we saw both AlphaTauris were fighting both Ferraris through a lot of it as well. Like, they were actually... It just showed how good the AlphaTauri pace was after whatever changes they made for the Saturday. It showed that they were actually quite quick. And the one fight that Alonso had, I think, against Gasly, he sort of overtook him into the final corner, and then the fight just happened all the way around to like turn 5. It was just like battling back and forth. I wanted to point that out because that was a really good battle as well. But I mean, the story was, out in front, everyone was just sort of holding their gap. No one was really fighting. They just sort of 3-4 seconds, 2 seconds. The top 5 or 6, and the Mercs slowly going backwards because their straight line speed was like non-existent and their tire wear was stupid high. I mean, I personally didn't have high hopes for the main race after the sprint race, seeing that, because I'm just like, all I see is like the Mercs going backwards and some overtakes with DRS, and then that's all she wrote. So
it was still hard to know truly, because I think my main hope was even around Norris and thinking, look, he was starting alongside, but he had a mid-start, he had to fight for it, but then he still seemed to make decent pace with Max and Red Bull, and we didn't get to see the strategy play out. It still wasn't clear on the Sunday. From myself, it was going to be 1, 2 or more, so it's almost just like, it's not like Max got ahead and then finished like 40 seconds up the road, and you went, there's no hope, we're looking at a P2. There was still something there going, it could happen. Of course, I kind of remembered going, let's look at the starting grid. It's Max, and then it's a Ferrari, and then it's 2 Astons, and you're like, Lando's kind of far away to make some fighting here, but as we'll get into, actually, those fortunes change in rapid before the race had barely had a quarter of a lap to happen.
Well, even before the fucking race even started, we had one of those drivers up front go into the wall on the formation lap in Leclerc. The hydraulics failed apparently. It apparently was doing some like weird shit. I was reading up on it. It was kind of confusing to me. He apparently got it going again. He's like, oh, it's just front wing. And then this thing showed up after like 10 seconds on his screen, and it just completely shut his car down again. And it was apparently some weird power unit thing. So I don't know if they've got a power unit issue, which going into Vegas would be very bad.
And this was similar to what they had in practice in Mexico, where Sainz talked about having some sort of faults and failures. Apparently it was very similar. So
right, okay.
There is some concern if they can identify it, or at least put it into safety mode until the end of the year, and how much of an effect that's going to have. Because obviously he didn't even get to start it. He was out, and out starting P2. Who knows, right? It's he said it. He couldn't have said it better himself. How unlucky can he be? Yep. It certainly was a day.
He's the only driver in 12 years to DNF, be disqualified, and DNS in a single season. The last one was apparently Checo in, I don't know, whatever, 12 years ago. So, yeah, a DNF, a DSQ, and a DNS in a single season. That kind of goes to show just how unlucky he's been.
This day and age,
Yeah, so that's... What can you do, man? But what it did mean is we had to start and there was one less car for, up in front. I mean...
So the road was clear for Alonso, right? To make a fantastic start, get the guns going, slice it down the inside of Max, and be good to go, right?
Yeah,
that's what happened?
That's what the script was.
The Aston wasn't the worst car to start in the history of the entire fucking year, was it? When we really needed the opposite.
Stroll was starting P3, and I think he dropped back
behind
3 places. Yeah, dropped back behind Alonso and Russell and Norris.
He went around the outside just going, get the fuck out of my way. This is my fight for P1. Thank God.
Yeah, so Norris got into P2,
Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, Norris got into P2 before we had the red flag, and I think that was really important for any sort of chance for the race.
Oh, wasn't it?
So... yeah, that was that. Well, anyway, go on with what you were going to say. Anyway,
no, I was going to say we had the overhead shot of the race start. You saw they all started, and Max went this way, the 2 Aston Martins went that way, and Norris and Russell went around this way.
Yeah, yep.
And the Aston's like, what's happening? Yeah. It was the both of them. It's the two of them together, just nowhere. It was and I didn't realize because I guess we didn't really see them in the sprint. But when I looked that back, apparently it looked like the exact same. I think they just didn't have a car to start here.
Yeah.
And Norris, I think, actually had an amazing reaction time.
Yeah, it was really good.
So, I think a bit after, I don't know if it was this race weekend. No, it would have been in the sprint where I think Max actually had a better kind of start off the line, and that helped him to sort of overtake him. So yeah, Norris had a great start. Somehow that front group didn't manage to make any contact, but I guess everyone else behind must have been watching it because some drivers got distracted, made a tiny little touch, and then absolute catastrophe that then seemed to literally bounce and bounce between other cars and many compounding effects. It took 20 replays to actually understand what the hell happened and why half the cars were in the garage of damage.
Yeah, I was going through slow-mo as I was doing it. It's they explained it all really thoroughly, but I'm in slow-mo. I'm I think I know what's happening.
It was fun to work it out yourself.
Yeah,
what happened to him? Where did that bit go? Where did that go?
What I did figure out is that there's some Brazilian deity that just hates Australians for some reason, because we had 2 Australians get almost taken out through no fault of their own. We had one of the Haas drivers go into the back of Piastri, which ruined his rear wing, and then we had one of those tires flying and hit Ricciardo's rear wing, and it was a miracle that they managed to get both of those cars fixed and back out, albeit a lap down, which again, that's a whole other conversation. I don't really understand why they were a lap down, because if you think about how a safety car works, they let lapped cars overtake, but for some reason under a red flag they don't.
The problem was because they went back into the garages to receive. I don't know what degree it is or if it's a line thing, but they'd have extensive part change, right? And that facilitated it. For the restart, they had to start from the pits.
Yes.
And that means you're not allowed to take the reconnaissance lap. Now, in a normal race start, that's not a problem. Right, it doesn't count as a racing lap.
Yeah.
The reconnaissance lap here does count as a lap of the race, I believe. And therefore, that's why even though they lined up, they'd missed a lap of the race, and therefore they were a lap down. So the real rule should be saying if you know you're not going to start, just send them out first and they come back into the pit, so they do their lap, then they're on the same as everyone else. Because in the spirit of competition, that just feels right, rather than, like we have these instances where we have a massive pile up or whatever, and some cars, gosh, I don't remember how it works, but it's some cars are somehow a lap down and they're all out of order, and some of them I feel like we had an instance like this. It wasn't Australia. Maybe it was in Australia in the past, Whereas like everyone's under a red flag, but some of them, just because they didn't get to go like the lap around and some of them were stopped and got turned around, it just means that even though they didn't receive external help, they still like a lap down on fuel and data, even though they weren't overlapped.
Right.
And in that case, they send them out early and then they kind of join to the back where they should be. It's I don't know if it's just because if there's cars that are blue flagged and they kind of let them through. I know this has happened in the past like that, but the difference is that's not cars that have gotten damaged. It's just because of the quirks of a red flag or a big incident. Some cars need to go around just so they use that fuel so they log correctly in the the race and all that. So this is different because they weren't in the wrong order or whatever. It's just that they got that help in the garage, which meant they'd start from the pit lane, but it wasn't in the rule to say, okay, then you get to take the reconnaissance lap, which is now a race lap. So I think that's why Ricardo afterwards is almost saying that's a dumb bloody rule. Like, can we just instantly, can we bring it up in the briefing and just change this instantly, please? Because that felt dumb. I don't think everyone agreed with him. So even the commentators didn't, understandably, they were like, at least they catch up. And they're like, they're a lap down. Well, that's just...
Yeah, I remember them talking about it and I was messaging you and I'm just like, I don't think they understand that they're a lap down, and it was
because
until,
it
like,
just
a lap
seems
later,
non-logical. Because normally, as you say, you have a start, cars starting from the pit lane, they just start at the back. But yeah, they inadvertently lost a lap. So I imagine it'll get brought up in the spirit of competition at least. Because even those teams will go, well, we can fix the car, but we're a lap down. What's the bloody point? Like, just save the parts, right? Like,
I know. I think Piastri actually came out and said, like, it's unfortunate, but he's been wanting to like test a lot of stuff anyway, so he basically used it as a big testing session. He's like, actually we got a lot of good data out of it, so it's like, okay, well,
it was fortunate for McLaren because they, I think, stuck him out on the medium as well, to almost use him as a test move for Lando, because they hadn't had much long running pace in that medium,
and he was like, it was shit. Like, it was not good. It was like,
this is dog crap. So which is it actually could have played into it. So in a way, McLaren were kind of logical about it, both saying we can use this as a bit of a test for Piastri in his car and put him out in the medium to see how it looks. Something AlphaTauri didn't do, and I reckon they might have looked at that with Yuki looking quick. Again, this is what we talked about before. Still didn't have a good weekend with those two drivers side by side, because Ricciardo, even starting near the back, apparently was very quick, lightning quick on those softs. Who knows where they could have been. And a big comment that really matters here, and I was jumping ahead of my thoughts there, is that AlphaTauri really now are like jumping between like the third, fourth, fifth best car now in most race weekends.
Does seem that way.
But they're not actually cashing it in like at all. And it's been 2 weekends in a row where Yuki, although he's gotten decent performances, well, I guess he didn't really get a decent performance in Mexico, because he was supposed to get like an 8th, but then he ended up getting outside the points. And even this weekend, he got a decent place, but he should have been effectively best of the rest, where I had the results. And
he was P9.
He got P9, but he should have been where the leading Alpine was. Because earlier in the race, that's essentially
P7, I think.
Yeah, he was racing, I don't know if it was Ocon or Gasly.
Gasly is the leading one,
Yes,
I think
he was
Ocon
racing
was P10.
Gasly. Yeah, and then he made a mistake and he lost a few places. And yes, he made them back and got a P9, but it should have been an easy P7. He probably should have, I don't know if he did, he probably should have overtaken the Mercedes. He arguably could have been faster than the Ferraris. Like, that car was quick, like probably behind Aston, McLaren, Red Bull. That probably could have been the fourth quickest car again.
I'd agree.
So trying to chase for that 7th place, this actually really matters. It doesn't matter if the team ends the year and goes, we got the 4th quickest car. Yeah, but we came 8th. It's like they should at least get the 7th, which you'd say is 100% where they should be here.
At this point,
So for those next 2 races, they're going to be like, we have to get double points both sessions, irrespective of anything else. We've got to just get a clean weekend in, because it's still, not a weekend where both cars will just run head to head, which says a lot, with those 2 drivers.
For sure.
Yes.
Well, I guess we'll move on to a bit later in the race. Like the only real chance we had with, we talked about how Norris, we still weren't sure whether or not he was going to push Max for the victory. Turns out, like, early on, he did have a real go at it. I think it was lap 8.
He did.
And it actually looked like there was all chance that he was going to get past both into T1 and then into T4. I think he said after the race is like, there's no point trying more than once. They still seem to think that even if they manage to get past and they're sending dirty air back to Max, there's
Yeah.
he just would have come back past and flown through.
Yeah.
I think that they're still talking about how tire deg on that Red Bull is still considerably better than anyone else, even the McLaren. So yeah, but it was good to see that at least there was a chance, and like even though he did stay behind for the rest of the race, he was basically matching Max almost the entire race. It was again just that sort of last phase on each of the tire stints where Max sort of had slightly better lap times, which is where they've always been strong. So, but before then it was like the same lap times, and even Max was coming back saying is like it wasn't as straightforward as it might have seemed from, the fact that he was just out in front the whole time, because he kept looking, or kept getting data fed back to him. It's like Lando's just doing the same lap times as me, lap after lap after lap, and it's like you'd have to say that sort of gets in your head, particularly when you're doing the right thing and you're managing, and like even Max isn't infallible to that one small mistake, and you lose 3-4 seconds, and he's right on the back of you, and even
he can do the same lap
pit
times.
Lane, that too. So it bodes well that they are starting to close in. It just we aren't quite seeing the fruits of that just yet. So, and we may still not this season,
and it does make a race feel better. Like we had a race with plenty else going on, which helped.
Yes,
but still knowing in the background, every 5 laps or so, you had a lead to check in just in case something was going on. It's not like you knew that he was lapping half the field and he was, and ironically, he did lap around half the field, but it is a fairly short circuit. But there was still a lot going on, and the fight could have still been there. So you still had something to check back on. It wasn't, forget it because it's just total domination. So.
Yeah. One fight that I did really like towards the end, the Alonso Perez one for P3 was
Titanic battle.
I was like basically checked out, like falling asleep, because it was just getting to that phase of the race where it was like, cool, this is where it ends. Like we had Checo fighting Alonso for 15, 20 laps beforehand, it felt like, and he was just not getting close until lap 70 of 71 when Checo finally made his move. I guess before we even get into that, I was reading up on sort of what Alonso was trying to do. He was talking about the commentators were talking about like the lines he was taking into that final corner before the straight, and how it was unconventional. And Alonso literally says like, that was entirely planned. I kept taking different lines into those corners to confuse Perez and like throw him off. And like, okay, so maybe he thinks that this is the better line, and like people. Checo's team was on the radio to him saying, oh, maybe you should try and take the wider line that Alonso's taking, but he's like, but then I don't have, I'm getting into the dirty air of his, and then I can't get the traction down. And like Alonso just had the big brain strat of like, I'm not going to take the same line twice.
It was so multi-layered. Like it was different lines to give better down the straight. It was to get in Perez's head. Arguably the lines he took were wider, sort of been less on his tires. I think he was saying that was his main concern as well, was making the tires last. He obviously knew he had a good battery management and a fair amount of juice down the straights, which is very important. But if your tires fall over, then someone's right behind you on the back straight, it's game over, right? And he even said afterwards, by like the second last lap, he knew they were toast. He's like, that's it. Like this strategy, we're like 2 laps to go. He could hold on to it. And then he was like, now it's just raw, like, adrenaline and skill, basically, which is essentially what we saw. We saw... I guess it was on like the second last lap, Perez essentially mounted his attack. And then, he got through and you thought, oh no. And Alonso's like, and came back at him with everything he had. Barely snuck back ahead. And then but then it was just like, well, is Checo going to try dive him somewhere? Because obviously Alonso, we can tell his car's spent, and he's just spent all his energy and everything to get back through somehow. And Checo, like he's a great driver, but he is known sometimes either in frustration or when he's being passed
to just send a bad move.
He can send a bad move or overblock or overdrive, overdive. He's one of those that, less... You see like he can kind of just force a clumsy move or a clumsy defense sometimes. But this time Alonso seemed to know perfectly how to handle it. But as we've seen in the past, when I think we had it was Hamilton Gasly is that still leading out of that last corner because of the nature of this straight, because it's still a difficult traction zone, because of the slipstream, because of everything, you can still have a run to the line.
Yep.
And you saw with these two, you knew it was going to be a run to the line. So we saw, Max come over the line, yeah, all good. Lando, yeah, all good. And you went, where are the other two?
Coming
and
out
then you
of
saw
the
them come out of that final line, and you were like, here we go. And sure enough, it turned out to be absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. I actually thought, like, I always forget how far along the line is down the straight. I always think it's earlier, and I'm just like, Alonso's got this, no problem. And then they kept fighting past where I thought the line was. I'm just like, oh god, he might get him here. And it came very, very close, and it was like, less than or it was like half a tenth of a second. So, like, literally, if that line was a couple of meters further down the track, he would have lost it, which is that's insane.
The thing. So they actually have two different start and finish lines. So the start line is right near the end. The finish line is a little earlier. And they said if they had done it from the start line, Perez would have been ahead.
Wow,
but the finish line is a little earlier, and that's when he just wasn't there. But it was good to see the camaraderie for the two of them afterwards. I think Alonso was getting interviewed, and Checo came over and basically said that was bloody fantastic.
Yeah.
They obviously both just loved it as competitors and lovers of the sport they dedicate their life to. So, that's what we like to see. A bloody good return to form from Alonso. We always said if that car's going to be strong again, it's the one weekend I didn't just give him my coin to say this is going to be it. This is what I knew would happen. As soon as that car's strong, he's going to make sure he extracts everything out of it, and you couldn't have asked for more. And we have to give credit to Checo too. I think again he started pretty poor, but he fought tooth and nail. Alonso had a big gap which he really churned down, and as much as maybe you could say, oh well, he should have gotten ahead sooner, he still I think you can't talk down his efforts too much. So almost a few drivers now where we go, just do this every weekend and your teams wouldn't have a problem with you. That's what you need to be there for. You've got number one doing it, just do this and then you're good to go. So more of this, please. It's more excitement. It's more faith in drivers that we want to see do well. And everyone would be happier.
100%. I guess we'll talk about very briefly on, I guess, the teams that had some troubles. Mercedes, obviously, we've already alluded to the fact that they were absolutely nowhere this weekend, which is odd considering how strong they normally are here. Russell ended up retiring.
Everyone thought they'd be strong, and they thought they'd be strong, but you'll go through it. It was
Russell ended up retiring with overheating. Like the oil temps were like at critical levels. They didn't want to lose a power unit because there was like like imminent power unit failure coming into what will be a very power sensitive circuit. They need a power unit to work basically, and they don't want to start further back if they don't have to by taking new parts. So they've retired him. For that, chances are he probably would have fallen out of the points anyway with the pace that they had. Crazy.
He was dropping off significant time.
It was like and Hamilton as well. Like you see down the straight, and I think there was comparisons in terms of their like straight line speed or their top speed down that main straight. Granted, obviously cars behind have DRS, but there's like a 30km/h difference, and it's like you can't keep a car behind when you're 30 k's an hour down. Chances are Hamilton's probably using his like overtake as well, so he probably has a little bit more than he normally would. But when an Alpine is 30 k's faster than you, and that Renault engine is supposedly the weakest on the grid, and is like 5 to 10 horsepower down on the other three engines, and it is sailing past you. They've gotten something very, very wrong this weekend.
Well, they even had, I think even Hamilton, like, I don't know if he really knew at the time or if he was just a little more clued in, but he even, I think how it turned out, Russell kind of ended up behind him quite early on. Was saying, I know we have to play the bigger picture. We have to do a team game. I'm not going to attack him. And it felt like he was really, really stuck behind Hamilton. But then as we saw later on towards the end of those stints, Hamilton kept going and Russell's car almost went kaboom. So it's almost like Hamilton knew to
manage a bit better.
I don't know if he said it like super coolly, but you could clearly say he was managing. I think Hamilton knew from very early and he wasn't going, whoa, suddenly we have to save a lot more than expected. He seems to know early on what he had to do to get the car home in the best position possible. While Russell still seemed to be like looking just like the small moments, going like, I feel like I've got pace now.
Can't look big picture.
Yes, and it's probably why the team didn't move him across. Maybe they didn't want to savor the radio because like if the team knew beforehand how weak they were going to be, they didn't just want to stay at the start of the race. Hey, Russell, reminder, we think we're going to be dog shit.
Yeah.
Please slow down, you know. They obviously didn't
Yeah.
want to say that. And that's why, yes, Hamilton still managed to limp home with something. But yeah, Russell at some point, he even was just saying, this is what the hell is going on, you know?
Yeah. It's
not been a good... Go on.
Well, I was gonna say, it's so weird because like the issues that they were having are so... It's so uncharacteristic of Mercedes. Like the overheating.
We'll be talking about they're the gods of keeping everything under control.
Yeah,
and their
exactly.
tires and their heating, and yet,
Yeah. Like they had super trouble with overheating. They had like what seemed to be the highest tire wear, even worse than Ferrari, who are known
lifting
to have
coast at every corner.
Yeah, exactly. Like fucking 15 laps into the race, they're just like, hey, we have to manage these temperatures. We have to manage these tires. And it's like, what? But Mercedes, you're the best at this. Like, how have you got this so wrong?
Yes.
There's
you literally moved away from a car that had no cooling to a car with like triple the amount of cooling.
And still having these issues. Like, they seem to think that some of their issues, not all of it, but some of their issues came from being a bit too generous with raising their ride height, being that it's a sprint weekend and them getting caught out during the US Grand Prix for similar issues. They seem to think that, you know, they've made their car quite draggy and caused their tire wear a little bit too much just by raising the ride height a little bit too high when they didn't need to. But like, other teams got it right and you didn't. Like, it all just seems very un-Mercedes like. Mercedes are usually on top of that sort of stuff. Like, they're not super conservative and you're trying to think of that, and they're usually on it and they usually make the right decisions, and they just didn't. This weekend they just didn't. They made all the wrong decisions. And
at the weekend where you think historically they've always made the best, they've been the best at making the best decisions. It's again, theme of the episode, theme of the year. It shows that you get it slightly wrong, and you're the 7th quickest car of the weekend from the 2nd quickest, or what we thought would be the quickest. You know, so it's brutal sport.
Yeah, definitely. The other team that had big issues as well. I still don't know. I think a day or two ago, I tried to look up what their issue was, but I think they were being very coy about it's a very like specific issue. But both Alfa Romeos retired during the race.
Yeah,
and I don't know if it was power unit related. The fact that they're not saying anything makes me think that it could be. That is 2 Ferrari power units. If it is power unit, maybe there's more updated information since then, but I think Ferrari could be getting to their classic Ferrari point of the year. Granted, later in the year than it usually is, where their power units just start going kaboom and failing. So I think that'll be coming into the Vegas Grand Prix, where a power unit being nice and fresh and working is very, very important, it seems like. That will be interesting to see how many of those go kaboom there, but maybe the lower temperatures will change that. But if it is power unit, then I think all Ferrari customers might be a little bit like, hey, what's happening? What are we looking at here? But yeah, I mean, outside of that, we had like I said, we had double points for Alpine. That's great for them. I think probably capitalizing on Mercedes being a bit shit this weekend. But yeah, drove a good race. P7, P10, I think, was Gasly and Ocon, if my memory serves me right.
Sounds about right. Something there, yeah.
Once again, Alpine just cashing in on the last of the points as they seem to when they have a good. This seems to be like the best case scenario for Alpine is like a like P7, maybe P8 if they can do it, and it's like they can never really get higher than that. But you know what? That's a good weekend for Alpine. So, yeah, that was pretty much all the notes I had. I guess we could talk about the fact that similar to the Australian Grand Prix, they had the track invasion at the end of the race where fans were let out onto the track.
Did they? I didn't actually see that.
Yeah, so apparently there were still cars out on the track and security guards let them through the gates and they invaded the track. Very similar to the Australian Grand Prix. And the FAA has come out and done exactly the same thing they did for the Australian organisers, saying, hey, you need to show us that you've got this under control for the next time we come here. So,
especially because they just extended the time that they're here as well.
Yes, yes, very important.
Not great timing.
So, But yeah, I mean, we'll see what comes out. I'm sure they've got that under control. So, but yeah, I don't know if you had anything else. That was pretty much all the notes that I had. I think it was like I said, a very strange weekend. I look forward to seeing how every team is completely different on pace next weekend. I don't understand it anymore. Like Norris could be like the P12 at Vegas, and I'd be like, yeah, you know what? That's about par for the course at this point. So.
It's gonna be. We'll get into it in our preview. It's gonna be a real wacky one, not just because new location, but I don't know the last time we drove in conditions that are going to be this cold. So
yes,
I think we have to do a bit of research to see what does that matter? Does that increase the amount you have to care about your car, or does it mean actually it's so well cooled that you can go balls to the walls? I need to do a bit of research about it. Actually, I got no idea.
Got a couple of days, but
yeah.
No, that was, but yeah, it was a crazy triple header. Hopefully this one comes out relatively quickly. Apologies for the lateness. It's been a crazy week for me in particular. But yeah, that was very strange. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and I guess even you can start to give us your thoughts on where we're going, what we're doing for Vegas. I still need to do a bit of research because there's a lot more talk about it starting to happen that I haven't really looked into. But let us know if you're excited or if you think it's just sort of. I think I know a lot of drivers are talking about how they're just not even a fan of going there. But you know what? I think we'll wait and see. We'll bring out our preview. We'll wait for the race and we'll see how we go. But until then, thank you everyone for listening and or watching, and we'll see you for the next video. Bye bye. Ciao.